At times, he may annoy them, he may embarrass them, frustrate them, but are Arkansas's Republican incumbents newly grateful? An especially frustrated Arkansas jurist turns again to the courts, and the issue again is political speech. Her court has tossed torts and term limits off the ballot, but what of the three other issues that remain? And for the citizen who doesn't want to wait, well, he or she doesn't have to, and not a few are choosing to not wait. Arkansas Week in a moment.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us. With Election Day just around the corner, it's already been Election Day for several thousand Arkansans. Early voting began Monday, with observers reporting significantly higher numbers at many polling places than in previous midterm elections, especially in more urban locations. Resolute Republicans or determined Democrats? Plainly, they weren't undecided, and we'll start there with Chris Housenick from the Political Science faculty at Arkansas Tech University, Rob Moritz, a freelance journalist and a J professor at UCA, and Lance Turner, reporter and columnist for Arkansas Business. Clearly, it would appear, anyway, from recent surveys, gentlemen, that President Trump, whatever his liabilities may have been in Arkansas, and they did not ever seem to be terribly low, he's done Arkansas Republican incumbents a favor of late, anyway, as reflected in those poll numbers. Chris?
Yeah, I would agree with that. President Trump's never had, manifested what could be harmful. We've talked about trade wars with China. We've talked about tariff wars. Getting rid of pre-existing conditions. These are all possibilities, but they've never become reality. He gave a lot of Republicans what they wanted. He gave them, now Supreme Court Associate Justice Kavanaugh. A lot of the threats that we worried about just haven't happened. And that's kept him in the game. He doesn't have that, if you had the big trade war with China, tariffs go up on rice products,
Market
100%.
sealed off, yeah.
Exactly. That's the kind of thing that would put Arkansas Republicans in a bind, and they just haven't materialized.
Well, they've politically speaking, anyway. Economically, yeah, they've started to, and yet my reports from the Delta indicate he's just as popular there as he has ever been.
And I think that I agree with you, but I think what's interesting about this campaign is the issues really don't seem to be driving it. It's the personality of Trump. It's keeping conservatives in Washington, and because every mailer, every commercial that you see, all you have to do is say Democrats and Nancy Pelosi, no matter which Democrat is running, and there does seem to be just a very voters are just very anti-Democrats and Nancy Pelosi. So that seems to be the driving message in the campaign, not necessarily the issues, as you said, because when you dig below the surface, clearly a lot of the issues that should be talking about would be things where you would consider, is Trump doing the right thing, or is he on the right path?
Yeah, the personality cult aspect as it's been described elsewhere. Right. Yeah, Lance?
Well, this morning we've got a GDP report that's pretty robust, 3.5% growth in the third quarter. That certainly can't hurt Donald Trump, and it certainly can't hurt Republicans, who will point to that and say, look, America, great again. It's happening, and it's doing well. That growth, by the way, driven by consumer spending. Consumers are feeling pretty good about spending their money, mainly because you look at unemployment. Unemployment's at a historic low, and inflation has been in check too. So people are feeling good about spending money, and that right now is sort of the thing on the surface that I think colors and maybe even obscures some of the other longer term risks of the economy that we may see down the road in terms of trade and what happens ultimately in these trade disputes, how that stuff really manifests itself at home in terms of our agriculture industry. Those are long-term issues that have yet to play out and still could be not great for the Trump administration, but I think in the near term, it's all looking very good for him.
Well, in the near term, his coattails would appear to be beneficial to at least the marquee races in Arkansas, particularly in the 2nd District, Rob, and in the race for
I
governor.
think that there are a lot of things that are coming to a head right now that kind of fall into what you're saying, and that is we've got the caravan coming up through Mexico, and there are a lot of people, including Trump, who are very concerned about immigrants coming in, and they want the wall built. And also, he just announced earlier this week that he hopes to get a bill before Congress that would have a tax cut for middle-income Americans. And just last week, he brought up the issue of transgender and the hiring and firing or in federal jobs. And all those things are just almost red meat for his supporters.
Base.
And that's really what those are the issues that he's looking for to really ratchet up support at the polls. I will say also that it's interesting, most off-year races, there's one party that's really, really adamant about getting to the polls, and the other party just kind of has a very lax attitude. This time around, both the Republicans and the Democrats are really, really getting their supporters out there. That's, I think, why you're going to see maybe a record for
early voting.
Yeah, and off-year voting.
Voting too.
Midterm
well,
voting
and,
too.
Yeah, and to your list, I would add in the last 48 hours or so, prescription drugs.
Yes. Yes. And of course, in the background, when President Trump was announcing that, you could see our Attorney General. She was up there representing the state when he made the announcement on prescription drugs as well.
Yeah. Chris, thoughts on coattails?
I think he definitely has strong coattails. It's very district specific, and I don't think, like in a state like Arkansas, you don't really need big coattails. This is a predominantly Republican state, so I think they're helping at the margins. But a lot of it is like was discussed. It's local economics are good. Unemployment has come down in the last. Since Governor Hutchinson, he could point to that. Unemployment is down, inflation is decent. Any kind of international problems has been localized to a few commodities, so that he's out there. But his coattails are bigger in states like Texas, where he's going down and talking with Ted Cruz. In Arkansas, he doesn't play it to the same degree or level.
Yeah. Well, the Republican incumbent who sits for Arkansas' 2nd District, Mr. Hill, would certainly appreciate the coattails.
Certainly.
If in fact that's what's going on.
If in fact that's what's going on. I mean, the 2nd District obviously is the one spot where Democrats might have a glimmer of hope, although I think some recent polls have sort of pointed out that still remains a long shot for Clark Tucker to be able to flip that seat. So yeah, I mean, he would certainly appreciate any help he can get, but I mean, really, it's just so deep red in Arkansas in all areas that it's kind of hard to see, any kind of chance, big chance of success there in that race. But that race has gotten a little bit more aggressive in recent weeks. I mean, Clark Tucker's finally started to kind of go directly at French Hill in some recent ads. I mean, I think some of these ads previously had sort of Clark Tucker at a little bit of a remove. Other people featured in the ads sort of making his case for him. But I think now he's really turned it on in the final weeks. We'll see if that narrows things a little bit. You never know.
Okay. And Rob mentioned this in terms of turnout, both for an off year and in both parties as well. If there is in fact this surge, trying to create a blue wave on the part of the Democrats, how far can it work? Any way to look at that the intensity of it anyway, based on early turnout voting, early voting? And we're all silent.
I'm not sure. I do think that it's going to be the red wave is going to continue.
Yeah.
But I think that there's maybe one or two. I think there's one constitutional office race that might flip to Democrat. It's going to be close, and that's Secretary of State. For the rest of them, I just think that it's going to be all Republicans again, and there may. I just don't see any of the congressional races changing political parties either.
Yeah, Chris?
You'd have, I completely agree. It wouldn't be a blue wave, it would be a blue tsunami, where you'd suddenly, most of the races, the constitutional races, you've got, ACE's up 20 points. If you had a 15-point Democratic wave, he still wins. Like you said, some of the constitutional races, it would take something like a 15 or 17-point wave for French Hill to be in a toss-up race. Same thing with like Leslie Rutledge. I have, just the way the voters are set up throughout Arkansas, that's a very, very difficult amount. A 7 or 8 point wave in Arkansas doesn't change any outcomes. All of a sudden, you win by 52-48. And it's very hard with a week and a half to go to see that kind of major systemic change on the horizon.
Once again, and for the second time in as many election cycles, a Supreme Court race is drawing an awful lot of attention, and again, it involves an incumbent associate justice, Justice Goodson. Lance, who has again, for the second time in this cycle, gone to the court seeking relief.
Right. And I think that case, interestingly, has gone to Wendell Griffin's courtroom. Some element of this case has, and so that's going to be kind of interesting too, given Wendell Griffin's current tussle with the Supreme Court. Anyway, yes. So, Courtney Goodson has been sort of this magnet, or maybe to use a cliche, a lightning rod for attacks from these sort of rightward-leaning groups, the Judicial Crisis Network in the first part of the year, another group in this latter half of the year spending more than $1 million against her with some ads that allege, talk about, that she's taken gifts from people, and that's compromised her ability to serve on the court, and she has struck back both times in those against those ads, trying to get the ads taken off the air. And that's worked to varying degrees in the first part of the year, and then once again in this second half of the year. This is just a race or a candidate who has just really kicked a hornet's nest of opposition. And you've seen this sort of play out in other court races across the country. These right-leaning groups really trying to change the makeup of the court and really going after people who are not aligned with their viewpoint, and going after them aggressively and very hard with millions of dollars in advertising, trying to remake the courts in states across the country.
With about a week remaining before the balloting, is it fair to say that these organizations in mention could easily drop another million, or at least $500,000 before Election Day?
I don't know I'm not familiar enough with how campaign finance works to be able to project how much more they can spend, but they've clearly got the deep pockets and clearly have the wherewithal to do it, and they have indicated that they will keep doing it. The director of this current group, whose name keeps escaping me,
Republican State Leadership.
Very good, yeah, has indicated they're going to continue to keep those on the air as long as they can, and they see no problem with what they're doing. And so, if there's money left to be spent, if there's money still in the tank, they're going to spend it in trying to change, unseat this justice.
Yeah, Rob.
And I think it's interesting, 10, 15 years ago, Arkansas, the state passed a law which tried to get the politics out of judicial elections. And now we've come full circle now, where, no matter how hard we get the parties out, there's still a large influx of money, both, conservative and liberal. But it seemed that politics is still really, really thick in those races, even though the voters have said we don't want politics in those races.
Well, yeah, we try to make it nonpartisan.
Right.
And the reality today is it's highly ideological.
It is.
Anyway.
It is.
And specific justices catering to specific parties and showing up at events that are, hosted by specific party people and appearing prominently with party people that all but scream, parenthetically, I'm a Republican, FYI. And so politics has has inflicted itself upon the court, and the court has changed because of it.
And even Justice Goodson's opponent has a mailer out saying that he's supported by both he has the same values, political values, as Asa Hutchinson and Donald Trump.
Well, there is this too, and both of Justice Goodson's complaints in court have gone to the core of a significant free speech component in American public life, and that is political speech. How free should it be? What are the parameters? The nation in much of the past century, well, continues to gives political speech, legally gives political speech a wide opening.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing with these state senate races, you've seen it with the judicial races, is that after Citizens United, the dark money has spread from, it started at presidential campaigns and moved to Senate campaigns, and now it's moving into even local judicial elections, state house seats, et cetera. It's just spread so much, it's pervasive throughout the system. So part of the lawsuits is, this giving money is considered a form of free speech. How do you limit it? Even Citizens United was declared unconstitutional. How do you sort of put the genie back in the bottle is a nationwide problem and not just limited to Arkansas.
And not just the funding, the underwriting of it, but the actual content of the ads themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because her claims are that some of these specific claims in the ads are false. I think that one of the ads claims that she advocated for a raise on the court. When she didn't specifically initiate that advocacy of a raise, it was the Chief Justice made the request on behalf of all the justices that they get a raise.
The council.
Right. So yeah, what's true and what's false, and that's sort of at the core of has been at the core of her complaint. But with these advertisers, or with these entities that are making these claims on the airwaves, backed by anonymous money, they really have no, they're backed anonymously, so they really have no incentive to be truthful, in any real way. So I think that's part of the problem too, is we don't specifically know who's paying for all this stuff, and for them, then it doesn't matter if they stretch the truth here or there or just outright lie.
Some other issues on the ballot, specific issues, 3 left of the 5 that were possible anyway, that we started the season with, including casinos. The saying, all politics is local, it is highly local in your hometown.
Yep. We live in Pope County. Many Pope County elections for Russellville mayor, Russellville ward members are pretty nondescript. You'll have one mayor, a token opponent, et cetera. We have, I think all the races are competitive. We have 3 mayoral candidates, and much of the debate and discussion is focused on their role should Arkansas voters say, yes, we want to open up casino gambling in Pope County. Now, part of this discussion is it's not just, okay, Arkansas voters pass it and then it magically comes into it. There's still Russellville, Pope County Quorum Court has to decide, and then, whether or not it goes into Pope County versus Russellville city limits. There's a lot of ifs, ands, buts, and maybes, but it seems to me...
Same would apply in Jefferson County also.
Yeah. But I don't... I think the one thing that's sort of interesting for a lot of... You were talking about coattails. This is almost backwards because, strong presidents drive more turnout. This is local things are pushing up the ballot where you're getting more people. Well, I want to vote about casinos in Pope County, so you're getting these just really high voter turnout numbers. Like as of, we've had 4 days of early voting. The number the Russellville Courier put out, there was 3,800 early voters in 4 days, and there's about 22 or 23,000 registered voters in Pope County. So it seems like, at least in our neck of the woods, this issue is driving voter turnout more than a love of Asa Hutchinson.
Yeah, well,
so.
Polarizing?
I would say so. You've got an economic side to it, and then you sort of have the moralistic side in competition. A casino comes in, if it's got a hotel and a restaurant, here's, it could be 500 jobs coming into Russellville and Pope County, but then you have churches being in opposition to it. You have Again, outside dark money, interests that are in play as well. Those against who run anti-addiction campaigns, et cetera, going against it as well. So it's, there's very few people that I've run into who are sort of in the middle, fence sitting on this one. Some people are strongly for it, some people are strongly against it.
Yeah, well, we've already got pari-mutuel and games of skill in Crittenden and Garland. So you had Jefferson and Pope.
And
Could
Crittenden's
pay off
on that
like a
list
slot
too, isn't
machine,
it?
you know?
Are there 3 counties or is it 2?
There was 4 sites. 2 of them are at the existing, the hot springs and the dog track, but I don't know about the.
Okay.
Pine Bluff is the third.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Area.
Jefferson and Pine Bluff Jefferson / Jefferson and Pope.
It could. The upside could be pretty great for all of those sites, and that's what I mean. Particularly in a place like Jefferson County that is banking a lot on and trying to renew and redevelop and do all this stuff. That's very tempting for folks, for a lot of folks, for a lot of voters. I'm sure jobs. They need jobs and they need population down there particularly. Yeah, but then you put it up against these your church groups and other folks on sort of a moral argument there too, and so you've got a recipe for people on taking extreme sides, I think, in that debate, and that could lead to a lot of more folks at the polls for sure.
Voter ID, another issue, Rob.
Well, it's finally on the ballot. And I don't think it's getting as much discussion statewide as some of the other issues. As I understand it, you would be required to have some kind of an ID when you vote. There will be accommodations made for you to get your ID if you can't get into Little Rock or can't go to the DMV or something like that. But this is just an issue that's been discussed. It's still, when you go to vote now, when you go in, they ask to see your ID. And it's optional, but this is something that would just put it in state law. And as I said, I don't think there hasn't been a whole lot of discussion about it and the implications that could come from it.
It strikes many as symbolic as real,
right,
on both sides of the argument. When I've talked to advocates for both sides, they say largely, even on the left, this is as symbolic as it is in Arkansas, likely as symbolic as it is concrete.
Well, and it's one of those things that we see across the country too. I mean, voter ID is making inroads in all kinds of places, and there's the broader discussion about what that means and what are the motives behind it. Are we talking vote suppression? Is that the ultimate goal, or are we talking ballot box security? Is that the ultimate goal? And folks on both sides of that argument argue both sides of that, and so it's taken a few tries to get it on the ballot here in Arkansas, and then of course we've just had a Supreme Court ruling about what's the existing setup that we have now. But this would be a constitutional amendment that puts it into the Constitution and gives it a lot more teeth and makes it a lot more difficult to roll back should the tastes of the day ever change.
Minimum wage.
Again, I think casinos have sucked a lot of the air out of the discussion, but I think minimum wage isn't as locked to the parties as some other issues might have been. But I would be, my estimate is it's probably going to pass. When you're talking about, lesser wage earners and over a long period of time, over the next 2 years, it doesn't have that, if you said, when you've heard this topic, many places, sort of like Seattle, we're going to raise the minimum wage to $15 starting on January 1st of 2019. That's a huge impact. But when you say we're going to creep it up to over $10 over 2 years, I think it softens the economic blow. So I think people are less reactionary, and they won't react as strongly to it as they would if it were a much more radical, quick change to the minimum wage laws.
Well, the business community is reacting to it.
And it's kind of a counterintuitive thing, because you talk about the Trump coattails, and raising the minimum wage is something that normally conservatives would not be for. However, a lot of the Trump supporters fall into the category, and they will probably support that increase, even though politically it's not something that Trump and fiscal conservatives would fall in line with.
This was one of a couple of defeats for the State Chamber of Commerce, which had tried to get this thrown off the ballot, and then they also they tried to retain the so-called tort reform amendment. They tried to keep that on the ballot, so they lost that one, and they lost this one as well. And they have advocated consistently against raising the minimum wage. The governor thinks it's a bad idea, of course, as well. But I think the reality is a lot of these employers are already starting to recognize that there are only so many unemployed people out there at the moment, and qualified workers as well, and they are already having, market forces are already making them raise that minimum wage anyway. Walmart, of course, Target, those big retailers that employ, a lot of people are already on programs to make their starting wages raise over the next few years as well. So I think you're right in terms of the sort of phasing it in approach is a pretty good approach. And, if you believe that the economy is going to continue to perform well, then maybe we can sustain that and absorb that well. Just in terms of, I also kind of agree that if you put a raise on the ballot in Arkansas, it's probably going to pass. Mm-hmm. And so, but you've seen ads, I've seen ads for it. I don't know that I've seen any ads against the minimum wage yet. There's that.
Got to end it there because we're out of time. Guys, thanks to you for coming in. As always, thanks to you for watching. See you next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.